Tonight, shakeup at the White House. Mike Waltz out as National Security Advisor to be replaced by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The latest as the Trump administration plays musical chairs. Plus, the National Day of Prayer. Americans pause to pray for healing and hope across the nation. And a new deal between the United States and Ukraine. But will it help bring an end to Russia's brutal war?
This agreement shows how invested the president is in securing a truly lasting peace.
Plus, concerns over the economy, what to expect from tomorrow's jobs report, and what it could mean for your wallet. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Major role changes in the Trump administration. Good evening from our Washington News Bureau. I'm John Jessup. Welcome to Faith Nation. Well, it was a whirlwind day at the White House. First, hearing that National Security Advisor Mike Waltz was expected to leave that role. Then a few hours later, learning that President Trump planned to nominate Waltz to be the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Reports of Waltz's potential ouster comes more than a month after controversy over a signal chat that exposed U.S. military plans when Waltz accidentally added a journalist to the group chat in what later became a major security breach. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will step in as interim National Security Advisor until the post is filled. Well, Josh Block is a foreign policy scholar and political strategist. He's also an adjunct fellow at the Hudson Institute. Josh, welcome to you. So Waltz is out as National Security Advisor and now heading to the United Nations. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will serve as interim acting National Secretary Advisor, or National Security Advisor rather. Your initial thoughts, Josh, and also as you give us your initial thoughts, can you tell us why now?
Well, only the folks in the White House can tell us why now. But clearly, the president wants to make a change. We've had this opening at the UN since Elise Stefanik's name was withdrawn. The White House said that was because they didn't want to weaken the Republican majority in the House any further. Mike Waltz, a decorated soldier, a special forces soldier. Served a long time in Congress with distinction, a great and articulate spokesman for America's values and certainly for the Trump administration's policies. And so putting him at the UN certainly makes a lot of sense, particularly if the president wants to make a change in the National Security Council. And having Secretary Rubio step in to play that role is certainly a good thing. As you know, John, we've got enormous stakes happening now with the negotiations with Iran, with the issue between Russia and Ukraine, and of course, all that's taking place with China, and then of course bilateral relations around the world with the tariffs and other issues going on. So having Secretary Rubio play a coordinating role as well as be a policy leader in the White House and for the State Department makes sense. And having Mike Waltz up in New York as a spokesman for the U.S. and for our policies also does. How much it relates to the signal snafu, only the president could tell us.
You said Marco Rubio moving into this role kind of makes sense, but how uncommon is it for someone who serves as Secretary of State to also be the National Security Advisor, even if it's acting? I think the last time we saw this was maybe in the 1970s with Henry Kissinger?
It is unusual. Henry Kissinger, as you know, played a very important role in American foreign policy and American national security. I think it speaks to the close relationship and growing trust and relationship that exists between Secretary Rubio and the president, that he would choose to have the secretary come in and play this important coordinating role among all the foreign policy, national security, intelligence apparatus of the government, and also lead America's foreign policy as our top diplomat. This, of course, takes place against the background in which Mr. Witkoff has been engaging in talks with Iran, with other parties around the world that are quite fraught and extraordinarily important to America's security, to that of our closest ally Israel, and to other Arab allies in the region who are also threatened by the Islamic Republic of Iran. So having Secretary Rubio in that role, very unusual, no question about it, but it does make a certain amount of sense for an administration that likes to do things in its own way.
Josh, just a few seconds left in a sentence or two. We heard earlier in the day of potential other departures. Do you think that there might be other people on the chopping block?
Well, it's certainly possible. We've heard that the deputy Alex Wong might be on his way out. Whether he'll get another assignment in the government or out, one can only speculate. And certainly, we've seen departures from other parts of the NSC and from the DoD in recent weeks. Some for ideological infighting reasons, and other for policy reasons. Hopefully, we'll see growing stability and wise counsel for this president going forward.
All right, Josh Block, we're going to have to leave it there with the Hudson Institute. Thanks, Josh, for being with us.
Pleasure.
Well, around the nation and right here in D.C., from the White House to the United States Capitol, prayer blanketed Washington Thursday as leaders commemorated the National Day of Prayer. At the White House, President Trump led the day's events, and that's where we find CBN White House correspondent Kelly Wright. Kelly, as you know, thousands of events around the country at state capitals and even prayer in the air. But can you tell us about the significance of today's event at the White House?
Yeah, John, this was pretty significant, as you've mentioned. Look, the National Day of Prayer observance began in 1952, passed by a resolution from Congress, celebrated by then President Harry S. Truman. Today in the Rose Garden, the President of the United States talked about it. And before he got into praying for the nation, he said, look, religion is very important to America. And if his big, beautiful bill doesn't get passed, then people will be losing their religion. That was his humorous way of talking about prayer. But then he said this in his words of prayer for the nation.
As we bow our heads in this beautiful day, once again we have to trust our God, because our God knows exactly where we're going, what we're doing, knows every inch of our life. And may He continue to hear our prayers, to guide our steps and build up our beloved nation to even greater heights.
I have to tell you, John, that was quite a moment in the Rose Garden of the White House, and many people there were listening to the president with rapt attention as praise and worship was also being celebrated here at the White House for the National Day of Prayer observance. John?
Quite a moment indeed. I know you spoke with White House faith advisor Paula White after the event. Kelly, what can you tell us about where exactly this White House is headed with regards to the faith office and its faith agenda?
So look, this National Day of observance of the prayer was more than just an observance. It was also a time for the president to sign yet another EO into existence. This one was the establishment of the Religious Liberty Commission. And Paula White described for me what that Religious Liberty Commission entails.
The commission will then first do a comprehensive report, which that comprehensive report will look at what are the threats to religious liberty. What has happened domestically to the Jewish people, Christian people, Muslim people, Sikhs, all people of faith? Where have people truly had a violation? And I can tell you there are going to be thousands of them, not hundreds, just because of the task force that I've been sitting in on and listening to that. Then when we look at the threats, what are the solutions? What do we need to do? How do we protect and preserve religious liberty?
And not only will they be looking for how to protect and defend religious liberty here nationally and domestically, but also sharing with other entities around the world to focus on how they can protect religious liberty throughout the world. John?
Kelly, there's other news that was coming out of the White House today, including the president's comments on tariffs and supply chain disruptions, where he said, quote, kids might have 2 dolls instead of 30. That remark received some criticism. How did the administration respond?
So this morning was an early morning White House press briefing, and Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller talked about that. He talked about the president's plans for dealing with China and for dealing with this economy domestically. Watch what he has to say.
Egg prices, of course, which was all you guys talked about for a few days, I think are down like 80%. The reality is that we can either surrender economically to China, or we can reclaim and reshore our manufacturing base and our industrial needs. And it's not just China. In the event of any national emergency, this is the president's first duty as commander-in-chief. In the event of any national emergency, we cannot be reliant on foreign countries for steel, aluminum, energy, technology, any of the essential components that we need to keep this country running. He is fulfilling his duty as commander-in-chief.
So, John, to wrap this up real quickly, it's a national security issue for the president. That's why he sees tariffs as playing a vital role. By the way, China is hinting that it might be open to talking with the United States. And the president also said from the Rose Garden today that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been talking to at least 200 nations. So he's been a very busy Treasury Secretary, and the president has been very busy in trying to get the tariff deals done. And he's still looking for that big, beautiful bill, even on today's National Day of Prayer observance. John?
A busy day for you as well. CBN News White House correspondent Kelly Wright. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Well, more legal setbacks for the White House in its ongoing battle with the courts over immigration. A federal judge today in Texas said the administration's use of the Alien Enemies Act to quickly deport undocumented Venezuelans is unlawful. Meanwhile, in a separate case, another federal judge said time is essentially up for the administration, denying a request to delay the discovery process in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The Trump administration apprehended the El Salvador native in Maryland and acknowledged mistakenly deporting him to an El Salvadoran prison back in March. After a brief pause in proceedings, the judge says the administration now has until next week to produce evidence it's working for his return to the United States. Meanwhile, the White House has released another allegation of domestic abuse against Abrego Garcia back in 2020. Well, turning now to the Middle East, a second straight day of raging wildfires near Jerusalem prompted the declaration of a national emergency. Nearly 5,000 acres have burned so far. At least 17 firefighters have been injured while battling the blazes. And more than a dozen others, including pregnant women and infants, were treated for smoke inhalation. Investigators have arrested at least 3 people on suspicion of arson. Well, the fires did not stop Israel from celebrating its Independence Day, although those commemorations were a little more muted. And in one standout moment, freed hostage Emily Damari took the stage, using her voice to honor those still missing.
I light this torch in honor of the 59 men and women who remain in Hamas captivity. We must do everything to bring them back home.
Damari also thanked the IDF. Meanwhile, several European countries are sending fire crews to Israel to help put out the flames. Well, coming up, a shrinking economy and emptying store shelves. What the president has to say about America's economic outlook. Welcome back. The economy is showing signs of slowing down. President Trump is responding to the downturn by pointing the finger at President Biden, while also warning Americans that product shortages could be coming. My colleague Jenna Browder has more.
President Trump addressed the Commerce Department report that shows the economy shrank 0.3% from January to the end of March. Speaking to the press in an open cabinet meeting, he put the blame on former President Biden.
He probably saw some numbers today, and I have to start off by saying that's Biden. That's not Trump.
The president is asking Americans to be patient. He says tariffs are not responsible for the downturn, and he's in no rush to make deals with China and other countries.
I'm in less of a hurry than you are. We are sitting on the catbird seat. They want us. We don't need them.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told Fox News countries are lining up to negotiate new trade deals.
We're putting together this plan and executing on it day by day, week by week, and it doesn't all happen at once, but the first 100 days set the table for the successes that we're going to see in the next 100.
Some blame the economic downturn on companies stockpiling inventory, even before the tariffs went into effect.
Businesses themselves have announced that, they are uncertain about how much they will be able to sell in the future.
Now there are concerns the 145% tariffs on China could dry up shipping. And there are signs that's already happening. Cargo ships into LA, for example, have dropped 36% from this time last year. Big box stores are warning that shelves could soon look more empty. With 80% of toys sold in the U.S. made in China, Trump acknowledged families could see fewer gifts under the tree.
Maybe the children will have 2 dolls instead of 30 dolls,
Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Thank you, Jenna. Well, Mark Hamrick joins us now. He's Washington's bureau chief and senior economic analyst for Bankrate.com. Mark, always good to see you. So the economy shrank slightly in the first 3 months of the first quarter of the year. That's according to the latest government figures. How much of that do you believe is accurate? And also, how much of the decline would you attribute to reaction to the president's trade and tariff policies?
Well, the data is credible. There's no reason not to believe the data, but I would not take a lot away from the fact that it was a negative print, that there was a minus sign away from it, because we had this 41% increase in imports. There was a massive imbalance between imports and exports, and that subtracted significantly from the growth reading. If you look at the sectors that were engaged in spending, consumers were spending at a rate of 1.8%, not the 4% they were before. Business was spending. The outlier not spending as much, a minus sign in front of federal spending, dragging down government spending. So, if I thought it was worthy of sort of saying there's a fire, I would tell you that. There obviously are incredible headwinds facing this economy, but we shouldn't place too much importance on this contraction merely for the sake of pointing out that it was a contraction, because the math is complicated on GDP. Whether we have a contraction, let's say, continuing this year, we'll see. The expectation is that we rebound in the plus column here in the current quarter.
The math, as you say, is complicated, but we're grateful you're here to help us navigate. So the government will release the April jobs report tomorrow. What are you expecting to see from that report, and what clues might it give us about the overall economic health of the country?
Let's remember that this monthly employment report, the data is gathered around the 12th of the previous month. So this is a snapshot around the second week of April. It was only, a number of days since the president announced this escalation in protectionism and tariffs that he did. And so what I think right now is you have uncertainty, you have volatility and disruption. Employers aren't feeling like they should be leaning forward and hiring a lot of people in an environment like this. We're not seeing a huge escalation in firings or layoffs in the private sector. So I think where the problem lies is the lack of confidence leading employers to hire. So the payrolls number, the number of jobs added, is expected to be below the level of the previous month. Around 130,000 jobs are expected to be added, but that is expected to be enough to keep the unemployment rate steady at 4.2%.
Well, the unemployment rate has been steady for quite some time. Longer term, though, do you think the underlying economy will be solid once we get through the storms of these trade policy changes?
Well, it's all on how long is that going to take, John. The average amount of time that it typically takes to negotiate a trade agreement is anywhere from 400 days to as long as 4 to 7 years. We can't wait that long with this uncertainty or the level of tariffs. As you said in Jenna's report, we're looking at container ships slowing markedly off the West Coast, the ripple effect being then in trucking with retail sales and consumers' ability to buy things. So I think at some point we're going to need to have a truce. There is an escalated risk of a recession this year, but right now we cannot say that there is a recession underway. We believe that the economy is continuing to grow, looking past that GDP report because of the way the math is done.
Very hopeful that we will avoid that R word. Mark Hamrick with Bankrate, thank you so much for coming on with us, and thank you so much for your insights. Well, still to come, the United States makes an agreement with Ukraine. What a minerals deal means for a possible end to the Russian invasion. Welcome back. Well, after months of tense negotiations, the United States and Ukraine have signed a deal expected to give Americans access to Ukraine's critical natural resources. CBN Washington correspondent Michelle London is tracking what this deal could mean. And Michelle, earlier today, President Volodymyr Zelensky said that he hopes it will help to secure a long-term defense against Russia.
That's right, John. Ukraine's prime minister calls this agreement between the U.S. and Ukraine a, quote, necessary decision. It essentially provides the U.S. access to Ukraine's mineral wealth, which is estimated to be worth billions. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent praised the deal, calling it a clear signal to Russian leadership that the Trump administration is committed to a peace process. Take a listen.
It's also a signal to the American people that we have a chance to participate, get some of the funding and the weapons, compensation for those, and be partners with the success of the Ukraine people.
Now, in exchange for Ukraine's rare earth minerals, the funds will be replenished with contributions from the U.S. Profits from those funds will then be reinvested exclusively in Ukraine. While the agreement doesn't offer Ukraine security guarantees, it does repeatedly state that the U.S. backs a peaceful and sovereign Ukraine. Meanwhile, another deadly Russian airstrike hit civilian sites, including a school, supermarket, and apartments. Speaking to News Nation, President Trump says this new deal could hinder Russia's invasion going forward. Now, as for what this deal covers, so far, 55 minerals are listed, including rare earth elements, as well as valuable resources, including oil and natural gas. That's according to Ukraine's government. Now, contrary to initial demands for Ukraine to pay its debt to the U.S., any profits under the deal will depend on the success of new investments. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, a close ally of President Trump, is moving ahead on a plan to impose new sanctions on Russia and steep tariffs on countries that buy Russian oil, gas, and uranium, as Trump struggles to fulfill his campaign promise to end the war in Ukraine. John?
All right, CBN's Michelle London. Thank you, Michelle. Well, coming up, some good news to share that's close to home about one of our very own. More on that next on Faith Nation.
Download the CBN News app. One place for all of your news. Breaking news alerts. Watch CBN News Channel live. CBN News, because truth matters. Get the CBN News app today.
Well, finally tonight, she wears many hats and has many titles. The newest, a Christian woman of distinction. Our very own Dana Ritter received the She Leads America Distinction Award. The D.C. Bureau Chief for CBN News for over the last 8 years, Dana has built a meaningful career centered around finding and reporting truth. She leads our team in covering the White House, Supreme Court, and other big stories here in Washington, D.C. As a Christian leader with 25 years of experience in broadcast journalism, her aim is to bring glory to God through the stories we cover. Dana received the award on Capitol Hill this week from Congresswoman Lisa McClain. We join her in celebrating this well-earned accomplishment. Not only is she a great leader, she's a great friend, and we're so privileged to be able to work with and for Dana. Congratulations, Dana, from all of us here in the D.C. Bureau and throughout CBN News. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation. Thank you so much for watching. We hope to see you right back here again tomorrow.